For all of our viewers out there, this is my lovely bride, Pamela Reynolds, who is also an RN, and she's our Chief Operating Officer of our Healthcare Expresses. And she's here to talk to us about employee problems, conflict resolution, what do you call it?
Solving the problems.
Solving the problems.
My job.
All right, so what made you decide, I know you wrote an article about this, so what made you kind of decide to write that article?
I think that the biggest challenge that I have as Chief Operating Officer is dealing with conflicts between employees. Our team is fantastic, but we frequently have just small little conflicts show up. And I've learned that if you let them sit and simmer, they cause bigger problems and cause conflicts between them, and then we have a whole group involved.
Anytime you get this many people, right, 90 or however many people we have now together, there's going to be little conflicts within them, especially, never mind, I can't say that on tape, but
I'm curious.
We have people of all sexes have problems with each other.
Yes.
Yes. So you have somebody, they have a problem, and you say, you hear about it, and you say, or they come to you, the first person comes to you and says, I have a problem with so-and-so, or I'm having this issue, what is the first thing you do?
Well, usually I just bring them in and I'm friendly with them, and I ask them, what is the basis of the problem? And they tell me, and I'll say, okay, did you talk to that person about it yet? Typically, I would say 90% of the time they have not. They want me to solve it. And I don't believe in them dropping their monkey in my office, so I send them back out to have a conversation with the person they have the conflict with.
And how often does that fix it?
Usually it fixes the problem, or they just don't have a problem anymore because they don't want to talk about it.
So it decreases the amount of time you have to spend solving really non-problems, right? Okay. So then that doesn't work. They come back in and they say, you know, I've talked to them, it's not working, now what should we do?
I'll go back through it again. Did you talk to him? Yes. Did you talk to him in a point? Did you mention it in passing, or did you sit down and talk to him? If they say that they've sat down and talked to him, or if it's in passing, I'll say, well, we need to try it again. And if it was actually, they mentioned it, the other person didn't want to resolve it, or they had further conflict, I bring them both in the office at that point.
So before we talk about what happens when you bring them both in the office, I noticed in your article, I thought it was great, it says, these were the worst of times, best of times, these were the worst of times, right?
Yes.
Describe what you mean by that.
Everything will be going along great. We now have 90. We started with 7 total team members 5 years ago, and now we have 90 plus team members. And it seems like we go through cycles of everything is wonderful. Everybody's happy, everybody loves their job, we're not having any issues. And I'm sitting back thinking, oh my gosh, this is the best ever. We've got this awesome group, they're working together.
I finally figured this out.
I'm smart, I finally figured it out. And then one person will come to me, and then another person will come to me, and then pretty soon I've got 3 or 4 or 5 people who I'm having to do some sort of intervention between people, and I think, oh my gosh, I've got 90 people and 80 of them are unhappy. Yeah. So it's a cycle.
Welcome to business, right?
Yes.
And it's kind of like my golf game. I hit 2 good shots, I'm like, finally, I figured this golf game out until the next shot. So it's kind of like that. I guess that's just the way life is. So now these 2 people are going to come in your room, and you described in your article there's 5 steps. And I'm not going to make you remember the 5 steps. Okay. I'll just ask you what they were.
Okay.
So basically, from what I recall, the first step was called address the issue. So what does that mean? I mean, it's self-explanatory, but how do you do that?
Well, within the five steps, by the time they get to me and I'm sitting in a room with both of them, we're already on between step 2 and step 3. What I do is I have them both come in the office, and we have time that's not going to be interrupted. Okay. And we shut the door, and I try and make it a joking, lighthearted atmosphere to begin with, because I know there's always tension in the room. And I will explain to them the rules before we start, that I'm going to ask them both the situation.
Ah, you have rules.
Their side of it. I tell them the rules beforehand, so everybody knows. When it's their turn to give their side of what they think is happening, the other person is not allowed to interrupt. They're not allowed to raise their voices. And they can't be accusatory.
Okay, good.
Because that way they know what to expect, and they usually sit there on their hands and rock back and forth a lot because they want to
They're angry, they're what?
And so I let one person state their side while the other person listens. No. And then when we switch to the second party, I tell them again, remember, we're not being accusatory, we're not pointing fingers. In your view, what is going on? Okay. And so now we've heard the story twice, and then I go third, and I tell them, again, you can't interrupt, you have to listen, and I'll say, okay, I believe your version is this. and your version is this, and I just say to them both. So we've now said it like
you're super intelligent.
I don't know. I learned from you, and it's from having all those kids.
I know. That's what I was going to point out. It sounds like you have 5 kids.
Yeah.
You do have 5 kids.
Yeah.
So really, you just take your mothering skills to work.
That's exactly what I do.
That's essentially.
I'm more like a principal at work.
You're a principal,
Yeah.
and I'm the vice principal.
Right.
If the principal doesn't
right.
get the job done.
And so by the time that we've stated it, actually to that point, a lot of times it's almost comical because they hear it and I'll try and put a little bit of a twist on it so that it lightens it as much as I can to kind of joke around with them so that they're not as mad. Usually by the time that I get to it, their defenses are let down and they're not so angry anymore. We just had this happen a couple weeks ago with 2 of our teammates that really had a lot of tension between them. You could feel it when they were in the room together. And so we did that, and you were in on that one too, and we let one state their side. The only thing that we didn't do to begin with was say, you can't interrupt. Because they
that would have been a good idea, though.
Yeah, and there was some voice raising, and actually somebody asked me if there was fighting in the conference room. So it got a little loud in there. And that was my mistake. I should have told them from the beginning. But we let them state their sides. And then you and I both restated it to them. And we told them, this is going to have to be resolved. And then they started working on their own after that. Okay. And they had a couple of bumps in the road after that. But I actually had a long conversation with both of them yesterday, and things are very, very good together. And they're actually having lunch together next week. So
wow.
Things are going good. Yeah.
So you talk about, in the steps, you talk about addressing the issue, finding mediation. We've sort of talked about what happens in those steps. Then you talk about listening to the problem, which you did. And I love the idea of restating the problem. I wish I could make myself sometimes remember to do that sometimes with employees, sometimes with our kids, sometimes with you. Because sometimes what we interpret to be what we thought we heard isn't what the person either meant or it isn't even what they said, right?
And I learned this actually at a conference with you. A lot of times if you have a conversation with somebody, when you walk out of the room, you have your solution and you think they have the same solution. But in all actuality, you don't. And so then you end up back in the same room again. And so at the end of it, we come to a conclusion together. I usually make them come up with 2 or 3 choices of what is the best resolution.
2 or 3?
Typically 3 if I can get them that far. 3 is best because I believe, 1 is a dilemma.
1 is no choice at all.
1 is no choice at all.
2 is a dilemma.
2 is a dilemma.
3 is a choice.
And so then we look at it, but then it's actually become kind of silly at that point.
Yeah.
And usually I'll try and say, you're both great people. Look at her. Look at all her great attributes, or look at his attributes. Look at all the great things about him. I think there's a misunderstanding here. And usually when you get to that point, it's much better. But we restate the solution. Also restate the solution once we come to it.
This is step 4.
Yes, and I make each of them restate the solution in their words to make sure we're all on the same page as to the end of it.
And step 5?
Step 5 is going back and meeting with them within a week or so, depending on the situation.
To make sure everything's cool.
And I don't meet with them together typically. I meet with them individually. I'll even pull them aside in the hallway and say, how are things?
And if there's still problems, start over?
We start over. And at that point, if we have to start over, sometimes it's a confusion. Sometimes it's just hurt feelings. And sometimes we hold on to those anger feelings and we can't quite get past them. But I think that typically we're done at that point. But after that, you've just got to decide if there continues to be problems with them. Is it really one person or the other? Is one of them just somebody who is
unresolvable?
Is not going to fit in the team?
Yeah.
The one that we had last week, it was 2 people who are great team members, and I knew it was a conflict of interest. And they're both great people. Sometimes it's a matter of one person's just causing problems, and maybe they don't belong on the team anymore.
Yeah, that happens sometimes, right? Not that they're not a good person, they just don't belong in our system. Sometimes that is the case. So what's your success rate using these 5 steps?
I've never actually looked at the statistics.
What would you guess?
I would say probably close to 95.
So it works very well.
Yeah,
it works very well. Okay, good. All right, any other advice for the new up-and-coming urgent care owner who's starting to have their first problems, or they're starting to build their business, and what would you tell them?
I think, number 1, you need to listen to your staff. I think it's really easy to get in the mode of we know everything because we own the business. And we have to step back and say, we may own the business, but they're the ones taking care of patients. They're the one working in the system. They're the one working with the providers. And they know the flow of things. So when we interject in our thoughts on what should and shouldn't work, they're the ones firsthand dealing with it. Yeah. So we need to remember that. And the second side of that is if you involve the team from the beginning, all the staff. It doesn't matter if they're housekeeping, if they're front desk, if they're nursing, if they're providers. They will buy into something that they're part of. Right. So if we set all the rules and tell them what the rules are, there will be long-term problems and consequences. They don't want to follow robotically. They want to be part of the situation.
Yeah, one of my mentors told me one time, you can be right or you can be rich.
Right.
You get to decide. But it's hard to be both. You can't be right and be rich. I chose rich. So it seems to be working out all right. Well, thank you for coming.
You're welcome.